Hello, and welcome to Exploring Axon, a podcast where we discuss Axon Framework, Axon Server, and their ecosystem. I am your host and a software developer at AxonIQ, Sara. In this episode, I spoke with my colleagues Bert Laverman and Campos about the benefits of using Axon Server on-premise versus Axon Server in the cloud. We talked about the different use cases and different audiences and different options that we offer in each. I hope you enjoy my conversation with them, and let's have a listen. Hi, Bert. Hi, Lucas. I hope you're both doing well. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about Axon Server and AxonIQ Cloud. So I'd like to start by a little round of introductions, please, if you would. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background. And Lucas, if you'd like to start off.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Lucas Campos. I'm from Brazil, living in the Netherlands for almost 5 years now, working at AxonIQ for 2.5 years, currently at cloud projects that we're going to talk about.
Fabulous, thank you. And I think it's worth mentioning that you're the technical lead for the cloud team at the moment. And great to have you, Bert. Would you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Bert Laverman, working as a software architect and developer in the Axon Server team, but also performing other duties for support for the cloud team, doing trainings, writing blogs, and several things.
Thank you so much. And yes, Bert is definitely our favorite honorary member in the cloud team and helping us a lot with a lot of the decision makings and telling us no when we're going astray, so which is great. So great to have you both here. I'd like to first talk a little bit about Axon Server and how we can set it up on premise and what is required to do that. So Bert, can you start us off a little bit about this? I know you and I had a bit of a detailed conversation about this in the past, but just an overview of if somebody is interested in using Axon Server, how should they go about this?
Yeah. So basically what nowadays I tell people is there are 3 ways to run Axon Server. The first one is the I have the power way, which just means you download Axon Server, and that is a jar file with some additional materials that you can get from the site, and then run it locally using your own favorite Java edition. But you can make it easy on yourself and run it the easy way, which is in Docker. And we have public images available on Docker Hub for Axon Server, both Standard Edition and Enterprise Edition. And then, of course, there is the easiest way, and that is the way that Lucas can tell about, because that is running Axon Server in the cloud. Then you don't need anything on your laptop. You only need your Axon Framework application, and as long as you have an internet connection, that's all you need.
Perfect. Now, you did mention Standard Edition and Enterprise Edition. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference between the two as well?
Yeah, well, basically, Standard Edition is a fully functional Axon Server instance. However, the Enterprise Edition supports what we call multi-context. So if you have followed the podcasts about DDD, domain-driven design, you know all about domains and how you can have within your application landscape multiple domains where you want to keep that separate. And in that case, of course, the best thing you want to do is also to keep your events and queries and commands separate. So you can do that by running multiple instances of Axon Server Standard Edition or a single instance or cluster of Axon Server Enterprise Edition instances. And then, of course, there are some other features, mostly to do with things like security and running in clusters, that Enterprise Edition supports that Standard Edition doesn't. And that's basically the difference. Yeah.
Perfect. And for the Standard Edition, do you also need to have a license to use Axon Server, or is this just for the Enterprise Edition?
That's just for the Enterprise Edition, and actually the Standard Edition is open source in the sense that all the sources are available. But if you download or pull from Docker Hub Axon Server Enterprise Edition and run it, then actually until it has a license, it will just behave like Standard Edition.
Okay, fantastic. That's really great to know. Now, I'd like to come back to the notion of the clusters, as you mentioned, a little bit more into detail, because that's something that we also offer in the cloud. And I think that would be a really good topic to go a little bit deeper into. But before that, Lucas, tell everybody a little bit about how to use the cloud. Hopefully, it's not a complicated process.
No, it's not at all. It's easy to do actually. So cloud is out there. We'll probably share the link afterwards.
Absolutely.
You can just log in using your Google account or a GitHub account. It will create an account for you there, and then you have the option to create a space, which is just a organization of your context, and then you can create context clusters, application bindings, and you are done.
Perfect. And so, yeah, obviously for the cloud, we don't need to have a license, and it's not on premise, and therefore there's no real onboarding. But we will get to the onboarding in just a few minutes as well. So going back to Axon Server on premise, whether it's Standard Edition or Enterprise Edition, Bert, what are the benefits of having the Axon Server on premise? And then we'll talk about the benefits maybe on the cloud. So I suppose you both can tell us a little bit about maybe the benefits on why would you want to have Axon Server instances on your local machine and basically have the whole control over what happens within the clusters or your context as opposed to being in the cloud. So tell me a little bit about pros and cons, maybe.
Yeah, well, I think, of course, the biggest pro is the magic word that you used yourself already, which is control. If you run it locally, you can decide how you install it and how big the cluster you're going to make. You can even make your own deployment patterns, having multiple instances spread across different regions, and then make your own context across that. But of course, then you have not just control, but also the price to pay, which means you have to manage it yourself. And that's the big difference, of course, with cloud, where the management bit is done by us, by Axonic. However, Axonic currently only offers Axonic Cloud in Google Cloud. And if you have all your applications running in Azure or in Amazon, then you might find a region that is close to your site to keep the communication as efficient as possible. But it could be that that is not good enough for your particular situation. That depends very much on your requirements.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I think that is probably the biggest differentiator for Axon Cloud versus running it locally.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you did mention that currently, yes, we do offer the cloud only in GCP, and in the future, hopefully not too far out there, we are planning on expanding to AWS and Azure. However, at the moment, not sure exactly when that's going to happen. But Lucas, tell us a little bit about if somebody is using Azure or AWS and they're not on GCP. How can we help them? I know we recently had that question asked.
Yeah, actually, it would work the same for us. The difference is what Bert said. It's not ideal as things are going to be far from each other, but it should work the same. We can probably do some networking there to make it a little bit easier. But the way to go would be to fully support AWS and Azure in the future.
Yeah, that just makes it a little bit easier. But as far as the management on our end, we're still managing it the same way for everyone in that case. Perfect. So going back to clusters a little bit. So Bert, you mentioned a bit about Axon Server clusters in Enterprise Edition. And I think it's worth mentioning that the cloud is basically Axon Server Enterprise Edition in the cloud. So we do offer a lot of the benefits of the Enterprise Edition that you would have, and you're able to use on-premise with a license. And I'm assuming, just a side question here, Bert, the licenses are basically, depending on a time, like, do you have to sign up for a period of time, let's say a year or 3 years, to use these licenses? Do we do shorter term license? How do the licenses work actually? Or is it the favorite answer of it depends?
Well, yes, of course, that is always a valid answer. You know that, but in this case, licenses are determined by for how long you are willing to commit yourself, or are able to, of course, financially commit yourself at once, and then how many contexts you would like, and how many nodes you would like in that cluster.
Right.
And of course, in the context of Axon Cloud, that doesn't exist at all, because there that is taken out of your hands, and you will get everything arranged by us.
Almost. And we'll come back to it. There's a little almost with the custom clusters, that, yeah, of course, that
Yes,
it's a little bit more customizable. But yeah,
of
absolutely.
course.
Yeah.
We'll definitely keep working and improving and offering more if customers want stuff that is not yet offered at the moment.
Yes, absolutely. Now, so going back to the clusters, you did mention with the Enterprise Edition, we have a cluster of nodes. Tell us a little bit about that. How many nodes do we have in each cluster? Are they customizable within the Enterprise Edition? And as you did mention, it just depends on the requirements. But maybe a little bit more detailed information on that, or maybe you have some use cases in mind that you'd like to share.
Yeah. So originally, when you think about things like high availability, what you talk about is having a working server and a backup server. And then, of course, you can have differences in using something called active passive, where you use an active one and have for backup one that is not doing anything until it's needed. Or you have active active, where both of them are being used. And with Axon Server, we're using a more modern approach, which is called consensus-based clustering. So actually, all of the servers are active, but it's not that you're just talking to one of them. You always talk to the whole team, so to speak, through that one that is your contact point. And your data is considered safely stored as soon as a majority of them have that data stored. Then, of course, this means that generally you will want an odd number to prevent the unfortunate problem of going a split halfway. But of course, if you have a larger environment and want to have, for example, an offsite backup copy of your data, then you can go for 4 or 5. Or, of course, in the case of AxonIQ Cloud, I mean, we are going essentially for, let's call it unlimited for the sake of argument, because we'll keep growing and we'll keep expanding into more regions, more availability zones, and even more cloud providers.
That makes sense. And so, Lucas, let's talk on the cloud side. So Berta did a really nice sort of transition into the cloud. How do we basically, what are we offering in the cloud right now? Whether it's with the shared clusters, private clusters, and then custom clusters. So let's maybe focus on the shared and private for the time being, and then we'll move on to the customs in just a few minutes.
Yeah, sure. So clusters is one of the things we offer at Cloud. This is the place where you create your context that you're going to use. So you can go for a shared cluster, which means those nodes are managed by us and is shared among all the other shared clusters. So you have neighbors, let's say, and they can influence your application as well. You have the private cluster, which is we are going to spin up new nodes for you, and you're the only one that's going to use that. And we have the custom one, which is, well, we can talk about it a bit later.
Yeah, so in terms of the shared clusters, so these clusters are basically, again, as you mentioned, they're managed by us, but if you have noisy neighbors, of course, it can influence your resources. Now, but if we want to use the shared clusters, can you tell me a little bit about why would you want to use shared clusters, and then what options do you have within those shared clusters in terms of your context?
Yeah, so the first step will be to pick a cluster. The second one will be a context. On a shared clusters, we have a context called developer, which is free to use, but every 14 days your data is removed. We have a single node cluster, single node context. For that one is a context created on a single node on Axon Server, shared cluster again. And we have the multi-region one, which are a context created on 3 nodes, again on shared. The prices will get higher and higher, so more nodes, more you pay. And also you pay for the number of messages you use. So more messages used, cheaper it gets.
Right. So then for the single node, I think it's obvious or maybe worth mentioning that then you don't get a backup for that context. So you just have that one single node to work on. What would be the use case for the single node context? Would you use this for production, or is it mostly for development purposes? Or
Yeah, I would say for development, you can use it if you have to keep your data for a longer time. And maybe for some integration tests as well, or for some
right.
tests in general. I wouldn't recommend it for production.
Yeah. And then what about the multi-zone? Would you then recommend the multi-zone for production, or is it still best to not use the shared clusters for production? What would be your recommendation? Or, I mean, I'm sure it depends, but just generally speaking.
Yeah, it really depends. For small applications, I would say it's fine to use it. But I would, of course, keep monitoring and see when it's time to go for a private cluster in this case.
Private clusters, yeah, makes sense. And yeah, as you mentioned, so with the shared clusters, then we don't need to really necessarily worry about the set. I mean, there is a set price monthly that you pay, but necessarily for the messages, I guess. And the messages would be then your events, commands, and queries. And depending on your usage, then you're paying for those messages. And the way also I think it's good to mention that these messages, the more you use, basically the price per message is lower. So it's kind of a good thing too. If you have a lot of messages that need to be handled, you don't have to worry about, oh my gosh, the price is going up and up and up the more messages you use. It actually kind of bundles up and gets a little bit lower per message. So that's a little bit of a nice thing too that we have for the pricing on that. Let's talk a little bit about private clusters now. So we have two types of private clusters. One is the small and one is large. So tell me a little bit about those two, and also maybe use cases if you'd like to share a little bit about which one is maybe appropriate for which audience.
Yeah, so for private clusters, we have small and large, as you said. A small one, it's 3 nodes on a small kind of machine on Google. It's 2 CPU, 8 giga of RAM each. For large ones, it's also 3 nodes, but it's 4 CPU and 16 giga of RAM each. A small one can be used for small applications in production as well. It's a private cluster. You're the only one using it. And large one you can use for large or medium, I would say medium kind of applications in production as well.
Yeah, and then can you tell me a little bit about pricing as well? Does it work basically the same as the shared did, where you pay a base price per month and then per messages, or is it different?
It's similar. So for context, on a shared, you have a base price for the context and also the amount of messages you use. For the private cluster, you have a base price for the cluster. You don't have a base price for the context anymore, but you still pay for the message you use.
Gotcha. Bert, in the Axon Server Enterprise Edition, do we have different sizes of clusters, or are they basically set, or is it really customizable? How does that work?
Well, that is actually just up to you. If you use Axon Server Enterprise Edition and host it yourself, then all you get is the software. So the sizing and the infrastructure you use to install it is up to you, which is, of course, eventually one of the things that might drive you to using your own cluster, your own managed cluster.
Right.
It's a thing where you have to do the calculations. I mean, this is where we use our favorite sentence, right? It depends.
Depends, right? Absolutely. And that's one of the questions we get a lot when we talk to customers who are thinking from maybe switching from enterprise into the cloud is that what size do we need? And one of the things that we tend to recommend is if you are using the private clusters, you can always start with the small. And if you feel that those resources are not enough, you can obviously um, upgrade it basically to the large clusters. Or if we're using custom, that's again customizable. So I keep throwing this custom clusters around this notion. Let's talk about those a little bit. Lucas, what are these custom clusters? Why do we have custom clusters versus private clusters? What is the use case here? What is the
So
purpose?
custom cluster is really customizable. You can go wild. You can request whatever you want. These regions, this number of nodes, I want them to communicate this way. Backups, passive, active, secondary nodes, anything you want, we can customize it and make it available for you.
Yeah, and I think there's another thing that we should mention, both for the Enterprise Edition as well as the custom clusters, which is the support. So let's talk about what we do offer in terms of support on our side for the users, whether it's Axon Server Enterprise and Cloud. So let's start with on-premise. So Bert, tell me a little bit about support. How does that work?
So generally what sales does, they use subscriptions, and what you get in a subscription will typically start with mostly developer support. So you can, of course, register tickets in our Freshdesk application, our support application, support portal, but you can also use Slack, and we have a Slack workspace. So if you have a support subscription, you get access to that. Or if you cannot use Slack within your organization, we also have a discuss site where you can connect to. And there you can talk with the people from Axonic who made the framework and who made Axon Server and ask your questions. So if you have any doubts, any problems that you run into while you're writing your application, while you're thinking about your deployment, then you can just contact us and discuss what you want to do. Then when you actually do have a deployment of an Axon Server cluster, then of course you can go for the different levels of support depending on how much support you want to have, for example, in case disaster strikes. So if you go for the highest level, well, basically you can call us 24/7 if the system is down in production, and we'll help you to get it back up.
Right. And you did mention something that I'd like to reiterate, which is you actually get in contact with our developers, the developers who are working on these products, which is really great because you don't have to go through sort of a liaison to get your questions answered. You can directly talk to the developers and get your questions answered as soon as possible. But then again, really based on what kind of subscription you have for the support, which is important. How does the support work in custom clusters? So for the cloud, with shared clusters and private clusters, we do not necessarily offer support. We still do offer support in terms of the Discuss platform. If that's our community platform, where you have the option of asking your questions in the community, as well as the Axonic developers can answer your questions. However, if you want dedicated support or an SLA, then we're talking more in terms of custom clusters. So Lucas, tell me a little bit about onboarding process for custom clusters, and how does the support work for that? Is it similar to the Enterprise Edition, or is it completely different?
It's similar to the Enterprise Edition. Everything is agreed on contract, how many nines you want on your SLA, and you have to make sure that your system will be live, will be online for forever. The only difference I can say is that we tend to be more proactive on cloud than reactive. So on Enterprise Edition, you have to come to us and say, "Hey, my system is down," so we have to wake up and see what's going on. On cloud, since we are the ones keeping the infra for you, we also have to monitor it. So as soon as we see anything is going wrong, we'll probably see it before you do.
Yeah, which is a really good thing. I had a question one time. Someone asked, "Do we have access to our logs, basically, if something goes wrong?" And I said, "Well, no. That's the whole point of having you on the cloud, so we can manage it, and you don't have to hopefully see those problems coming up. We can prevent them, basically, which is really great. So." That's really nice to know that there is that option also available for the cloud where you can get the support. And now let's talk a little bit about something that often comes up as well, which is the protection of your data and your sensitive data. So, how does it work within the Axon server, whether it's standard edition or enterprise edition? Do we have some way of protecting your sensitive data? And same question for cloud. So, Bert, if you'd like to start us off with the standard edition and enterprise edition, how do we protect our sensitive data?
Yeah, well, of course, it starts with securing access to Axon Server itself. So within Axon Server, you can create user accounts and register applications. In standard edition, this boils down to saying whether a user is an admin user or not. And in Enterprise Edition, because you have multi-context, you can actually assign roles with a lot more specific usage scenarios per context. Then the next step is that you want to protect your data. Of course, we support things like adding TLS to your connections. But then when it's about actual encryption of the data, then this is something that you want to take care of in your Axon Framework application, because you want the personally identifiable information encrypted before you send it to Axon Server. We can do it in Axon Server if you want. We have this fantastic option called a plugin where you can actually do encrypting in Axon Server, but then the data is not encrypted as soon as it is in your Axon Framework application, which is probably not what you want. In that case, you have to use the data protection module, which works together with the Axon Framework and which can be configured to encrypt selected parts of your messages. Then when it's stored in Axon Server, or even before that, when it's sent to Axon Server, those fields will already be encrypted, and nobody on the infrastructure side, on the Axon Framework side, will ever be able to see and read that information. Then, of course, the next question is, okay, so what if I don't want that data anymore because it's a customer and the customer sends an email and says, I want you to forget all about me, because that is what they can do with the GDPR. Then the simplest thing is just to throw away the key. So if you forget the key, you can still read the event, but it's all gibberish. So
Right.
that is a very safe solution.
Fantastic. Do we have something similar to this in the cloud?
For the first part, Bert mentioned about user roles. Yes, we do. So it's not on the content level like in Axon Server, but it's on the space level. Mm-hmm. So you can give different users different kind of access on your space. For the event itself, it's the same like Bert said. So we push it to the client, to the Axon Server application, and they can use the data protection module and encrypt their events before sending it to cloud.
Yeah, so they can do that on the framework side, but basically, and not necessarily within the cloud. So we don't have that sort of encryption in the cloud for you, so to speak. Let's touch a little bit on data migration now. So with Axon Server itself, and I did actually have an episode on this with Steven, who's our Axon Framework lead developer, about migrating your data. And the process seems to be pretty straightforward, not necessarily easy, but it can be done. Do we have that option within the cloud as well? So if, for instance, you are on the Axon Server on-premise, so enterprise or standard edition, and then wanting to move to the cloud, how can we manage the migration of your data? Do we have an option right now where we can basically move your data and put it in, say, a bucket on our side or the client side? Do we have that figured out at the moment, or are we still working on this?
It depends, I would say. For custom clusters, I would say we support it. We can help you and do the migration. For private and shared, you can pretty much write an application, probably like Steven said on the other episode, but we are working on a feature. It's on the roadmap, so you can upload and download events from your cloud.
Right.
So it's probably going to work like you said, bucket somewhere, have to upload your files there, and then you're going to import it on your newly created context.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Fantastic. I think there's a lot of, incentive to use either. So if it really depends on your personal use case, right? If you want to use the Axon Server on-premise versus the cloud, but it's really great to know that there are options available, and they're both really great options, either way you want to go to. And we do have a lot of information, of course, for the Axon Server, both standard edition, which is, as Bert mentioned earlier, open source. It's free to use, and you can give it a try. And then if you decide to move towards the enterprise edition, we can assist you to that. And then same thing with the cloud. There's a lot of options that we can use within the cloud, whether it's self-onboarding or with us onboarding the customer. So it's really great to have all of this information. And I really appreciate both of you for being here today and giving some of your amazing expertise in both fields of the on-premise versus cloud to everybody, and discussing this with me and our audience. So thank you so much. And I really hope that you both have a great day. And I hope this episode helps everybody to kind of make a decision if they're thinking about either option. So thanks so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Have a great day. I hope you liked my talk with Bert and Lucas. Please join me next time as I discover other amazing topics with wonderful guests. Until then, have a great time and happy coding.